The Bitcoin virus is finally spreading in the developing world, not the Cardano virus, but it's still a good thing. Ready? Let's go. Since President Bukele of El Salvador announced that Bitcoin would become legal tender in his country, we've seen at least 3 other Latin American politicians come out in support of Bitcoin. On our side, of course, we wish this was Cardano instead, but I think this was probably really inevitable. Nick Carter, despite being the world's most gigantic Bitcoin maximalist, summed it up perfectly. He said, "A nation state BTC land grab has begun." He then went on to assign the interest in BTC for a lot of these countries to chronic sovereign defaulters in Eastern Europe and Latin America. I'm not so sure if that is a wide enough scope to describe why countries are interested in BTC, since the petrodollar system has been the only possible reality for the last several decades. I think there's probably a multitude of reasons why a lot of countries, especially smaller countries in the developing world, would want to opt out of the petrodollar system. I think Balaji Srinivasan's slightly broader description probably comes closer to truly hitting the mark. He said the G7 announces they are fixing prices while El Salvador announces they are going crypto. This is a trend to watch: centralized collusion versus decentralized defection. Incumbents want to freeze things in place while small states can gain billions by taking another path. Isn't this always what we expect out of human behavior? The haves want to make things move slowly. They want to freeze things in place. They don't want change, while the have-nots will always want change. I think this is true of any human society. It doesn't apply to any particular geographic part of the earth. I think all humans, of course, operate this way. And I think defection is exactly the right term for what's happening and what's going to happen. Here, Balaji cites the quote, "Central banks are increasingly taking actions that may cause harm to the economic stability of El Salvador." He says small countries can now finally insulate themselves from the effects of dissolute monetary policy, go Bitcoin to get to higher ground. And what's interesting is that I think this will have effects not just on the individual nation state level, but in terms of the numbers, which are on the side of the smaller nations. I'm not talking about absolute population numbers, but the number of small nation states that have been forced into this petrodollar system over, all the previous decades in memory is very large compared to the small number of very large states that sort of benefit from this system. I mean that in the sense that it's seldom better to be the borrower than it is to be the bank in that relationship. But among those countries that would probably love to opt out of this petrodollar system, we're starting to see politicians jumping at just the notion that this is possible. Here we see Gilson Marquez, a legislator from Brazil. He's got the laser eyes there. Carlitos Reala, a politician from Paraguay, laser eyes. Gabriel Silva, a Panamanian politician, no laser eyes, but showing his support for similar action in Panama that's been taken in El Salvador. Fabio Osterman, another Brazilian politician, laser eyes. He's got like the stark laser eyes there too, like the angry laser eyes. He's very serious about this Bitcoin business. I think this opting out of the petrodollar system in favor of Bitcoin is a little bit like the 4-minute mile, which notoriously, and albeit according to legend, was thought to be nearly impossible until Roger Bannister did it in 1954. But since then, 1,400 people have done it. So what is the G7 that Balaji is talking about? So the G7 is Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the United States. The EU also has a seat there. So these are the countries that end up making a lot of the loans. At least these countries or international institutions controlled by these countries, largely controlled by these countries, end up making the loans when countries start going broke. So you can imagine the countries that are not a part of this elite group would probably love to opt out of a system where the central banks of these countries have a let's call it an arguably highly disproportionate impact on the global economy, right? By population, these countries don't represent as large a slice of the global pie as the impact of their central banks does. So we're probably apt to see a lot of countries following the path of El Salvador and President Bukele here, right? And it should probably be a spectrum. There'll probably be a spectrum of countries adopting Bitcoin as a kind of reserve asset that they put some portion of their national assets into. I'm sure there will be other countries that actually adopt Bitcoin as a form of legal tender, like El Salvador has done. But the putting some percentage of national assets into Bitcoin will be very promising to some of these countries that have previously been subject to constant loans from these G7 type countries, because it's a hope of getting out of that cycle, right? If just like a regular retail investor, who buys a little crypto in the hopes that in the next cycle it balloons out of control, they can somehow maybe sell at the top, but somehow increase their net worth, and all of a sudden they get out of the vicious death spiral that a lot of consumers find themselves in. A lot of these nation states are going to have the same feeling. Otherwise, a lot of these countries are just kind of in this perpetual death cycle where they take loans and they default on the loans, and then the next loan has stricter covenants attached to it, and then they default on that one, and then the next loan's even stricter, right? Horrible position to be in. And there aren't many other assets they can hold like that, right? Certainly not the fiat currencies of any of the G7 members, right? They can't really hold the dollar, for instance, because they don't know when the Fed is just going to come out and devalue the dollar. Just like your average, worker who might have dollars in their savings account is subjected to the inflation that, famously has made things like Bitcoin so attractive, right? Workers' salaries stored in US dollars in their savings accounts don't increase in value, they decrease in value every single day. Countries experience this as well. And Bitcoin is this brand new kind of asset. They can grab some Bitcoin, and man, the track record for the last decade has been that it only goes up, right? You can't really say that about a lot of things. You can't say that about gold. Gold goes up and down. You don't really know what it's going to do. It's a volatile market that doesn't have this crazy track record of being like the greatest appreciating asset in the history of finance. I, for one, really, really, really hope this works. The thought of all these far-flung countries being under the thumb of the central banks of a tiny, tiny sliver of the countries on Earth is pretty discouraging, right? I don't think that's the way any of us really want our global economy to operate. I think these countries are on the right track. Looking to the disinflationary nature of cryptocurrencies is certainly a great way to opt out of a global economic system based on highly inflationary fiat currencies like the US dollar, the euro, yen, what have you. But they're going to run into some obstacles, right? Like we talked about yesterday, Bitcoin traditionally has been on this like sort of stock to flow cycle. Like every 4 years, we have this cycle where we have a boom and then a bust. And no matter how much voters in a particular country might love the politician who made it happen, they'd probably prefer that they not go through this multi-year bear cycle where their national assets, lose value and just kind of sit there and don't do anything for multiple years, right? Of course, some of you probably believe in this super cycle scenario. Let's, intellectually take that off the table for a second, because all we've seen is this boom and bust cycle in crypto so far. So if that happens in some of these countries, they're going to be looking around and asking themselves, okay, we've got all this Bitcoin. How do we create a yield here, right? And I don't think it's going to be very attractive. Some of the solutions that, say, retail crypto investors would use, like taking their Bitcoin and turning it into wrapped Bitcoin so they can throw it into some DeFi project on Ethereum, and completely lose custody of their asset. or send it to BlockFi, again, losing custody of their asset. I don't think that's going to be very palatable to a lot of these nation states. They're going to look for other ways to get a yield on those assets. And when they look around for ways to do that, I think they're going to discover proof of stake, and they're going to say to themselves, hey, we could buy the exact same amount of a Gen 3 proof of stake coin like Cardano, and in the case of Cardano specifically, enjoy a 5% yield on these assets. Even if we're in a bear market, we're experiencing a 5% yield. And once we get through this bear market, we're going to have another, hopefully another boom cycle. And then we'll have accumulated all of our staking rewards through this interim period. I think that's going to be far more attractive than this sort of dead asset Bitcoin that just sits there, and it's difficult to get a yield on your Bitcoin through normal crypto mechanisms unless you are willing to lose custody. Also, they will be looking forward to the sort of like economic systemic miracle of cryptocurrencies, all the disintermediating the middleman stuff that the crypto space has done a great job of selling all these years. But I think pretty quickly they're going to realize a lot of what they would love to do requires programmability. So they're going to start looking at other cryptocurrencies, and they're going to go through probably the same evolution that most crypto investors do. Everybody becomes enamored with Satoshi's great invention, absolute scarcity, absolute digital scarcity. It's incredible. You become very enamored with it. And then you realize there's no programmability and the transaction fees in Bitcoin are killing you. So you start looking at Ethereum and you're like, oh, now I have programmability. But then you realize that the gas fees in Ethereum are killing you. And the programmability is maybe not optimal. Maybe Solidity is not the best programming language in the world, right? That's when I think a lot of these countries will start looking around for something even better. And they'll realize, hey, we've been dealing with Gen 1 and Gen 2 cryptocurrencies. It's now a lot of years past the prime of those technologies. We should look at the Gen 3 cryptocurrencies. And the leader among those right now is Cardano. Cardano is the leading Gen 3 cryptocurrency. Like we've covered on this channel previously, Ethereum 2.0 is not coming for a while. And the fact that they're not even wanting to use the terminology Ethereum 2.0 anymore is probably a sign that it's not going to be as dramatic a change as anyone would like to see over on the Ethereum side. So I think Cardano's in a great place. As they look around and they're like, wait a second, what about all the disintermediation of the middlemen and allowing, lightning fast cross-border payments from our workers abroad? As they start asking for those things, the, layer 2 solution of the Lightning Network is going to be underwhelming. It's not going to be satisfying. Ethereum 1.0, which is the only thing we've got around on the Ethereum side of the world for a while, is not going to be satisfying. But in a couple of months, Cardano's going to have smart contracts, and all of these things that the crypto revolution has promised us all along are going to become possible, because for the first time, we're going to have a proof of stake system that actually works with smart contracts that actually work. Transaction fees are going to be low. It's going to be everything that everyone was always promised in cryptocurrencies. And that's exactly what I think these smaller nation states are going to be looking for. They don't want to just come to par with the developing countries. They want to do what Ethiopia has already done for their education system with the Atala Prism solution. They want to leapfrog where the developed countries are right now. They want to move into a future where they're on an even a level economic playing field with all the rest of the countries and not constantly stuck in this debt cycle. And when I take all these different factors in their totality, I can't make a good argument that any blockchain is in a better place to service those needs than Cardano. So I think it being the Bitcoin virus that's spreading right now in the developing world is just fine, because that's sort of the natural evolution of a single human being getting into crypto. They go to Bitcoin, then they go to Ethereum, and then they start looking around and asking for something better. And I think nation states are just following the same path. They're going to Bitcoin, and then they're going to look around and they're going to realize the benefits of programmability. And then they're going to look around and they're going to ask themselves, wait, there's got to be a better way to do crypto with programmability. And that's where Cardano comes in. Talk to you tomorrow.